And then came Doom, the one that made parents nervous, teachers furious, and had kids huddled around beige desktop PCs in awe as demons exploded into bloody pixel chunks. Doom was the forbidden fruit of the early 1990s, and for a brief, shining moment, Atari, of all companies, had the best version you could play in your living room. Yes, Atari, the same folks who brought you E.T. on the 2600, suddenly had bragging rights over Sega, Nintendo, and even the mighty 3DO. Today, we're deep diving into the strange but fascinating story of Doom on the Atari Jaguar. In the end, this is so much more than just another port. It's a story about ambition, compromise, and raw determination. It represents a moment when Atari still swung for the fences, and when Jaguar owners could finally brag that their version of Doom wasn't a watered-down joke. John Carmack himself even stepped in and was coding like a mad scientist, wrestling with Atari's over-engineered beast of a console, pulling off miracles and making painful compromises along the way. Behind every shotgun blast and demon growl was a battle against the Jaguar's bizarre hardware, and the result is one of gaming's greatest comeback stories. Forget what you think you know about Doom ports. This is the untold tale of how Atari briefly stole the crown and how it all slipped away. So join me to totally geek out for a while in this retro gaming boss technical deep dive of Doom for the Atari Jaguar. As we begin our exploration, this video is divided into 3 parts. First, we'll discover why id Software decided to focus their development of console Doom ports principally to the Jaguar. In the second part, we'll review John Carmack's experience and views about developing on the system, including what he liked and what he couldn't stand about it. And finally, in part 3, we'll look at the programming Wizardry used to squeeze the most out of the Jaguar hardware, resulting in what many consider to be the greatest home port of this game of its era. So to put things in perspective, we need to rewind back to the beginning, before Doom the Dark Ages was a thing, way back in 1993. id Software changed gaming forever with the original DOS version of Doom. It wasn't just a game, it was a cultural event. A pixelated horror show with demons, shotguns, and a major attitude. It ran on PCs, but here's the thing. Not everyone had a PC powerful enough to handle it. Doom needed horsepower, and in the early 90s, a gaming PC could set you back more than your entire rent. So naturally, console players were desperate for their own taste of Doom. Gaming magazines hyped it up. Playground rumors spread, and suddenly the question wasn't if Doom would hit consoles, it was when, and how good would it be? Sega jumped in first with a 32X version in late 1994. It beat Atari to the punch in terms of the release date, but here's the twist. The Jaguar version was actually finished first. In fact, it became the basis for nearly every other console port of Doom that followed at the time, including the 32X. And for good reason. Because John Carmack himself rolled up his sleeves and handled the Jaguar port personally. The man who invented the Doom engine was now wrangling with Atari's alien hardware to bring his gift to console players. Atari billed the Jaguar as the world's first 64-bit console, a huge claim at the time when Sega and Nintendo were still living in the 16-bit world, and when the PlayStation and Saturn were just peeking over the horizon. The Jaguar was supposed to be Atari's comeback, the system that would prove the company wasn't just a relic of the 2600 era. Jag Doom itself runs buttery smooth in full-screen mode with impressive lighting effects that closely replicate the quality of the original PC game. And playing this on the Jaguar was a real thrill to experience the true power of the system. It's hard to describe actually, but after having played tons of 2D 16-bit games before this, jumping into Doom on the Jaguar felt like stepping into the big leagues of gaming. And all of Atari's marketing hype somehow seemed to be more real. 64-bit power and all. The game even had 2-player deathmatch mode, and a co-op mode via the Jag Link accessory, which added even more good fun to the excellent single-player campaign. Doom was so popular in the 90s that companies actually banned it from the offices because employees were spending too much time in LAN deathmatches instead of, working. Doom was literally costing businesses money. But here's the catch. The Jaguar's architecture was kind of a nightmare. It wasn't just one chip, it was a Hydra-headed beast with 2 custom processors named Tom and Jerry, plus a Motorola 68000 CPU tacked on, like duct tape holding the whole contraption together, with a 64-bit bus and object processor to boot. And in theory, it was powerful. In practice, many developers couldn't figure out how to make it do anything without pulling their hair out. Atari knew they needed a killer app to prove this system was worth owning, and Doom was the obvious candidate. The company aggressively courted id Software, dangling money and technical promises, while Carmack was intrigued enough to give it a shot. But we'll come back to this in a minute in part 2. Here's where the horror story begins. The Jaguar's custom chips weren't just quirky, they were hungry. Each had strict memory requirements, and the console only had 2 megabytes of RAM to begin with. That's less memory than your smartphone wastes on a single meme. The developers quickly found themselves fighting obscure bugs, timing issues, and driver headaches that made debugging feel like playing Doom in real life. Every time they solved one problem, another imp popped up and ripped their face off. So compromises had to be made. The Jaguar version removed several enemies entirely. No spider mastermind or the cyber demon. What? And even the specters, the translucent versions of Pinky Demons, were omitted with the partial invisibility effect. This Jag port, along with most others based on it, do not truly contain a specter monster, since they are rendered identically to demons and are indistinguishable from them. And in-game music? Gone.
Game over, man. It's game over.
Replaced entirely by eerie ambient sound effects that made the game feel almost more like a survival horror slog than an action game. One of the things that I noticed when I popped the cartridge into my Jaguar was that the color palette was darker compared to what I was used to playing on the PC version. And if you want to hear about that experience, I made a whole other video about playing Doom on the PC back in the day that I've linked in the description below, so check it out and stick around for a while. But back to the Jaguar version. The use of its chroma-based 16-bit CRY color format is what caused the overall darker image due to its shading to black, compared to a RGB-based DOS version. Interestingly, the Jaguar's specialized hardware provides significantly smoother depth shading. But, for performance optimization reasons, the Jaguar port uses double-width pixels, effectively halving the horizontal resolution. This is especially noticeable on the first-person weapon sprites. The Cyber Demon wasn't just cut from the Jaguar version. He was famously missing from several console ports, which is wild because he's basically Doom's Darth Vader baddie. I mean, imagine Star Wars without Vader. Yeah, same energy here. And before I forget, I'd also like to invite you to subscribe to my YouTube channel, which is always here for a quick retro gaming break whenever you need it. I appreciate your support, since it's the only way YouTube will highlight my videos and help my channel to grow. Now, before we jump further into the rabbit hole about the technologies used to create Jaguar Doom, I want to put a bit of a disclaimer out there that some of the following details are anecdotal and based on the best and most credible information I could find online, from a variety of different sources, and primarily from various interviews with John Carmack himself. And while I wasn't part of the development team, I believe the following explanation does get most of the technical details right. But if you catch any oversights, then please let me know about them in the comments below. It's important to remember first that Carmack was also previously involved with the Wolfenstein 3D port, using the source code of the Super Nintendo game on a whim. He later converted it to run on the Jaguar. Atari Corporation approved the conversion for publication, and Carmack spent 3 weeks assisted by Dave Taylor improving the port's graphics and quality to what he later claimed was 4 times more detailed than the DOS version. He also removed the changes that Nintendo had stubbornly insisted on for the Super Nintendo port. As Doom was blowing up and becoming a phenomenon on the PC, Carmack knew he had to get Doom onto a console for it to reach an even wider audience, since many people couldn't afford a PC back then, let alone one good enough to run Doom competently, and the rest is history. So, in his mind, Jaguar was a $250 bare metal powerhouse that was the best platform available at the time to port Doom. It didn't require add-ons like Sega's 32X or Nintendo's Super FX chips, both of which were still inferior solutions. And it didn't cost $700 like the 3DO, which Carmack wasn't about to use its cell for the graphics anyway, due to his dislike of affine texture warping. The Jaguar really was the perfect sweet spot at the time for Doom, but sadly Atari never bothered with much of a software development kit, so only uber geniuses like Carmack could really make proper use of the hardware. Now, to better illustrate, let's look at his own words about this. The following are his direct quotes, so these are his words, not mine. Many developers are planning on waiting out the early 32-bit hardware wars, but I want to do a cool product even if it doesn't make tons of money. Sandy, our map designer, semi-derisively calls Doom Jaguar my reward for writing Doom PC. Good job. You can go play with your new toys. Our initial appraisal of the Jaguar was nice system, but Atari probably can't make it a success. But when I got to the technical documentation, I was very impressed. This is the system I want to see become a standard platform. I was slated to do a cut-down version of Doom for the Super Nintendo using the Super FX chip, but I keep thinking about how cool a Jaguar version for Doom would be, and Nintendo kept rejecting Wolfenstein for BS reasons like a Golden Cross bonus item that might offend Christians, right? We finally decided that we didn't want to be part of the chicken and the egg problem of new systems not attracting customers because developers haven't written for the platform because there's no customers. The Jag is cool. I think it has a shot at success, and I'm going to put my time where my mouth is. Why the Jag is cooler than the 3DO from my point of view, it only costs $250. The bulk of its processing power is user programmable. The 3DO has a capable main processor, a couple times better than the weak 68,000 CPU in the Jag, but most of the 3DO's power is in custom hardware that has narrow functionality for affine transformation. The Jag has some stupid hardware for Z-buffering and Garot shading, but I can just ignore it and tell the two 27 MHz RISC chips to do exactly what I want. A 64-bit bus with multiple independent processors may not be the easiest thing to optimize for, but there is a lot of potential. Now, here's where John Carmack truly earned his reputation as a wizard. As he mentioned, there were some unnecessary bottlenecks in the Jaguar's design which, if corrected, would have sped up performance considerably. Carmack's prescription? Atari should have replaced the 68,000 CPU with a third 32-bit RISC processor, add a dynamic cache to it, and give the Blitzer chip at least a small buffer. He claimed that with these changes, the Jaguar would not have matched the performance of the Sega Saturn, but would have been competitive even against the PlayStation. Between his involvement with development of the Jag ports of Wolfenstein 3D and Doom, he initially had mostly praise for its hardware. Reportedly, at one point even, he tried to get a stripped-down version of Quake running on it for a while, though given what a technical marvel even the Sega Saturn version of Quake is, it's difficult to imagine how it could have compared on the Jaguar. However, his attitude changed as the projects chugged along. After completing Jag Doom, months of struggling to work around poorly thought-out aspects of the system's architecture seems to have soured him to it somewhat. Again, looking at his own words, not mine. The Jaguar was definitely significantly hampered by its technical flaws, which kept me from ever being too big of a Jaguar booster. I was proud of my work on Wolf and Doom, more so than just about any of the other console work id had been involved in, but in the end, the better consoles won the war. The little RISC engines were decent processors, and I was surprised that they didn't use off-the-shelf designs, but they basically worked okay. They had some design hazards, write after write, that didn't get fixed, but the only thing truly wrong with them was that they had scratchpad memory instead of caches, and couldn't execute code from main memory, so I had to chunk the Doom renderer into 9 sequentially loaded overlays to get it working, and with hindsight, I would have done it differently in about 3. So it's a shame he didn't continue working with it, and in my mind, a huge missed opportunity by Atari due to their haphazard hardware design. You can thank the Tramiels for it being underpowered. The chips were not complete and had bugs. The designers, who weren't experts in silicon design, missed some fundamentals. Just one more register and it could have run without stalling all the time. If they had fixed this, the Jag truly could have given the PlayStation a run for its money. And skilled programmer Steven Scavone, not associated with Jag Doom, offered another point of view and elaborated on the keys to programming games on the Jaguar, explaining in layman's terms that it should be coded in as much assembler as possible. This machine flies when fueled by assembler. The risks in proper concert with the 68000 will do some absolutely amazing graphics. The Jaguar could utterly crush any 2D system. It's a lot easier to program 2D for than the PlayStation or Nintendo 64. So all of that considered, instead of relying on the Jaguar's Motorola 68000, the same humble 16-bit CPU used in the Sega Genesis, Carmack bypassed it almost completely. He pushed Doom's guts directly into the 32-bit TOM graphics processor and its Blitzer chip, milking raw performance out of the hardware that most developers couldn't even wrangle. He further reworked Doom's math to use fixed-point arithmetic instead of floating point. That might sound small, but on the Jaguar, it was a massive enhancement. Suddenly, the walls and floors could be calculated faster with less processing overhead, and the game's frame rate jumped as a result. The level renderer also got put on a diet. On the PC, Doom relied on hefty binary space partitioning trees to keep levels running fast. And on the Jaguar, Carmack slimmed that system down, simplifying the math so the console didn't choke on any memory calls. Some, but not all of the animated textures were chopped, not just for memory savings, but to reduce processor stalls. Sprite details were trimmed a bit too. And while these losses stung a bit in the overall presentation compared to the PC version, it freed up the bandwidth needed to keep the action smooth. Even the audio was an optimization in disguise. No MIDI soundtracks were used during gameplay here, just ambient sound effects. It wasn't just atmospheric, it was practical. Music drivers would have eaten up cycles that the Jaguar simply couldn't spare. There were ports of the original PC music that played between the levels, which gave the players a flavor. While I've seen some debate online about the music being excluded due to budget reasons, that doesn't make any sense at all, since the music does play between the levels. I've read in a few places as well that the Jaguar's Jerry DSP chip was also employed to help with some math processing during gameplay, which would have made it impossible for it to process the music simultaneously. But maybe the most impressive trick was Carmack's multi-processor juggling act. The Jaguar was infamous for having several chips that didn't like to play nicely. Carmack basically became an orchestra conductor. While one chip drew walls, another scaled sprites, while another handled clearing registers. He staggered their different workloads in a precise and coordinated sequence, so the machine was always doing something useful instead of idling. And the end result was a Doom that ran full screen, fast and smoother than anything the 32X, Super Nintendo, or 3DO could dream of. Carmack himself later admitted Jaguar development was both fun and frustrating. Fun because he loved squeezing power out of strange hardware. Frustrating because Atari's development kits were disorganized and incomplete at best, non-existent at worst. Doom on the Jaguar was actually used as the basis for several other console ports, including the 32X and even the PlayStation version. So in a way, every time you enjoyed Doom on your PlayStation, you were playing what was first built upon the Jaguar's shoulders. Now behind the scenes, it wasn't just Carmack. A small team of programmers and artists from id and Atari poured their time and maybe their sanity into getting this thing out the door. Long nights, tight deadlines, constant pressure. This was the reality of mid-90s game development. And they all contributed to a port that, despite its compromises, gave Jaguar owners bragging rights. For that brief moment, if you wanted to play the most faithful console Doom, you just had to play it on the Jaguar. But here's when the what-if questions start to sting. What if Atari had given the team more time? What if better development tools had been made available? Instead, we've ended up with history giving us a mixed bag. Fans and homebrew magicians of today have continued the innovation and created an expanded version of the original Jaguar game that even includes the original in-game music and restores some missing features, which proves that, with the right support, the Jaguar could have handled even more. But those are just glimpses into an alternate reality that I wish was a thing back in 1994 when I was pulling all-nighters in my parents' basement as a starving college student. So to truly understand the quality of the original Jaguar Doom, let's line up the different console versions and shine a flashlight into their dark corners, because each port tells its own little horror story. The Sega 32X version gets a lot of flack, but let's be fair, it was the very first console port of Doom. Boy does it show. The screen size was shrunk down into sort of a postage stamp window, with thick borders gobbling up real estate on the screen, like Pac-Man. Levels? Not all of them made the cut. You got 17 maps out of the 27 from the PC, so whole chunks of hell were missing. And forget about facing off against the Cyber Demon or Spider Mastermind. Those big, bad bosses were nowhere to be found. And as with the Jaguar version, the level maps themselves have been edited significantly to cut down on the amount of geometry and texture usage. Much of this is blamed on Sega's rush to get the game out in time for the 32X launch date, while other aspects are simply due to the fundamental hardware limitations of that console. Still, the 32X version ran at kind of a moderate clip, around 20 frames per second on average, and trust me, if you grew up as a kid on the Genesis in the early 90s, this was your ticket into Doom. Sure, the music was butchered into a bloody pulp by the 32X's sound hardware. It sounded like Doom was being played through a broken car stereo. I mean, check out this comment I saw about it.
No!
The internets have spoken. But overall, the core gameplay was still kinda there, but I'm sorry, the Sega 32X was just no match for the Jaguar on this one. Now, on to the Super Nintendo version. Bless its little 16-bit heart. This port used the much-hyped Super FX2 chip, an improvement over the original bolt-on chip that debuted in the Star Fox cartridge, and it pushed the Super Nintendo beyond all of its limits. And the results? The resolution was muddy. The frame rate fell into single digits at times, and the enemies would sometimes flicker like ghosts because the system just couldn't draw them all cleanly. Like with the other consoles, levels were missing left and right. You only got 22 of the PC maps, and they were simplified versions of that. Many rooms were stripped down or completely reworked just to make them fit into the cartridge's limitations. While the audio and music took a hit from the original PC version, the iconic Doom soundtrack was still there, and it didn't actually sound half bad, compared to the 32X version, but that's not saying much. While the Super Nintendo may actually be the worst overall console port at the time, in some weird way I still find it a little impressive that it was pulled off at all on a 16-bit console, so while it's a noble attempt, the experience itself is pretty crude, and if you ask me, it's headache-inducing and not recommended. As our final point of comparison to other contemporary console ports, let's check out how the 3DO version stacks up. So where do we start? Well, this one was pretty much a train wreck from day one. And the story goes that one of the programmers, Rebecca Heinemann, was basically handed the task and told, "You've got 10 weeks, good luck." And the results look exactly like what you'd expect from such a cruel deadline. The game ran in a tiny window in the middle of the screen, and even then it crawled along at something that looks like about 8 frames a second on a good day. But, to give credit where it's due, the 3DO version did have one saving grace: the soundtrack. Instead of MIDI, it featured fully re-recorded CD audio tracks that really shredded. So we've come full circle as we return to the Jaguar version, the surprising champion of the bunch. Yes, content was missing here too, but despite all of that, Jaguar port delivered where it mattered most: speed, smoothness, and playability. Up until the PlayStation version, which we'll talk about in a minute, the Jaguar version was a powerhouse that absolutely rocked and was a blast to play. It really captured the look and feel of the PC experience for the most part, and made Jag owners feel like they got their money's worth. And while the PlayStation version that came out a year after the Jaguar port is superior in every aspect, it was still based on the Jag Doom code. It also adds more content due to the additional storage capability of its CD format, including all of the levels not only from the original Doom, but from Doom 2, and it had all of the different monsters in it. unquestionably, Doom on the PlayStation ended up being the best console port of the mid-90s. The Sega Saturn had a port that wasn't released until 1997 that was also based on the PlayStation version, and sadly, it didn't run very well. But it had some extra secret hidden away and new enemies, which gave Saturn owners some extra fun of their own. So in the final analysis, Doom on the Atari Jaguar was the surprising champion and granddaddy of the bunch. But it's by no stretch of the imagination a perfect port, and here are some of my personal pet peeves. The most significant drawback is the absence of the original game's music, and while I'll admit it doesn't really detract too much from the experience, it is still noticeable. I remember the feeling of playing that heavy metal music from Alice in Chains on my CD player that sat next to the TV when I was playing this, which, believe me, more than makes up for it. Like the other ports, several levels are either missing or truncated, and two of the game's most iconic enemies, the Cyber Demon and Spider Mastermind, are absent, which, looking back on it now, I just find really hard to forgive. I mean, come on, this is supposed to be Doom. As mentioned earlier, the graphics look just a little too dark. I mean, seriously, I remember having to manually adjust the brightness on my old TV to make the game playable. Another very minor criticism is that the controller setup on the Jaguar prevented players from circle strafing. Sure, you could strafe from side to side, and the overall controls weren't bad at all, but I always wished that movement could have translated somehow from the more fluid keyboard and mouse controls on the PC. The Jag's controller did make good use of its number pad, which, when you slipped in the little overlay card, made it a snap to quickly alternate through the different weapons, without having to slow down the action by using a selection menu. Lastly, unlike the Wolfenstein 3D port, Jag Doom lacks multiple save slots and checkpoints, which means players have to replay long levels from the beginning if they die, adding to the old-school challenge, but also causing frustration at times. None of these are deal breakers, of course. I just wish a few common-sense, quality-of-life fixes could have been made before it was originally released. I mean, a guy can dream, right? So as we wrap things up, it's hard to argue that Doom on the Atari Jaguar isn't a solid and enjoyable port, especially for collectors and fans of the console. While it's not the exact same experience found on the PC, it's still a thrilling and very playable version of the game that remains one of the brightest points of light in the Jaguar's library. Now we can see why John Carmack himself preferred the Jaguar version. For a brief, shining point during 1994, Atari regained its bragging rights. If you wanted the best home version of Doom, you had to own their weird, complicated, and powerful console. And then, later, the Jaguar fizzled itself out, buried under groundbreaking technological advancements of the PlayStation and Nintendo 64, and their virtually limitless marketing budgets. Nevertheless, Jaguar Doom is a true success story that shows what could be done when developers pushed impossible hardware to its limits. And maybe that's why we still talk about it today. Not because it was perfect, but because it proved that even in Atari's twilight years, the company could still deliver a BFG shot of a gaming experience, even as it went down swinging, Alamo style.
Can't you remember anything?
I remembered the Alamo.
So next time you fire up Doom on the Jaguar, remember that behind every pixel, every demon, and every shotgun blast, there's a story of developers who fought through their own hell to bring hell onto your console. Thanks very much for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive, please help me out and hit that like button. Tell me in the comments which version of Doom you played first, and whether you survived the Super Nintendo port. And if you're new here, welcome to the channel, and subscribe for more feel-good retro gaming content. Alright my friends, this is the Retro Gaming Boss signing out, reminding you to keep your games old school. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.